When the kidneys fail in the critically ill patient, we can't always rush them to a 4-hour dialysis session. They may be too unstable, too hypotensive, too fragile. So instead, we do something gentler. We filter their blood slowly, continuously around the clock. That's CRRT. This is one of the machines you often see in ICU. Everything CRRT does, every gram of urea cleared, every ml of fluid removed, happens through 4 mechanisms: diffusion, ultrafiltration, convection, and adsorption. In this first episode, we are going to take them one at a time. Diffusion is the principle most of us first met in high school chemistry, and it works exactly the same way here. Solutes move across the semi-permeable membrane from an area of high concentration to low concentration until equilibrium is reached. The steeper the concentration gradient, the faster diffusion happens. In CRRT, blood flows on one side of the membrane and dialysate flows on the other. Now that dialysate doesn't have to be moving. Let's say in peritoneal dialysis, it sits stationary. But in CRRT, we typically run it in the opposite direction to the blood, what we call countercurrent flow. And countercurrent is the most efficient arrangement because it maintains the concentration gradient along the entire length of the filter, delaying equilibrium. Diffusion is the workhorse for small molecules. We're talking about urea, potassium, bicarbonate. These molecules move easily across the membrane. And here's another special thing about diffusion. It's actually bidirectional. If you want to give the patient something, let's say replace their potassium because they've gone hypokalemic, you can simply put potassium in the dialysate, a higher concentration relative to the serum. The gradient now runs the other way, and potassium diffuses into the bloodstream. But wait, there's more. Diffusion is not the be-all and end-all of CRRT. It has its own weakness. Larger molecules move sluggishly, and the bigger they get, the worse diffusion becomes at clearing them. So if we want to remove middle and large size molecules, we need a different mechanism, which brings us to ultrafiltration. Ultrafiltration is all about moving fluid across the membrane, driven by a hydrostatic pressure gradient. Here's how it works in the circuit. The blood pump generates positive pressure on the blood side of the membrane. It's the pusher. Meanwhile, the effluent pump generates negative pressure on the other side of the filter. It's the puller. The result is a pressure differential across the membrane called the transmembrane pressure, or TMP. That pressure forces water across the membrane from blood into the effluent compartment. You would notice that ultrafiltration doesn't require a dialysate fluid to flow on the other side of the filter. Think of it like squeezing a lemon through a sieve. The juice is pushed through and the pulp stays behind. The higher the pressure gradient, the faster the rate of the fluid removal. This is how CRRT manages fluid overload. You know that classic ICU patient who's 12 liters positive after a week of resuscitation? We dial up the ultrafiltration rate and we pull fluid off slowly and safely. Now you might be thinking, if ultrafiltration only moves water, what happens to the solutes dissolved in that water? Well, they come along for the ride. And that's the next mechanism we are going to talk about. Convection is the unidirectional movement of solutes across the membrane, dragged along by the flow of water. The technical term for this is solvent drag. And it's a beautifully descriptive name. The solvent, which is the water, drags the solids with it. Convection happens alongside ultrafiltration. Wherever you have ultrafiltration, you will have convection. And here's why it matters clinically. Convection works regardless of the molecular size. It clears small molecules and large molecules with comparable efficiency. So this is how we remove the bigger stuff. Myoglobin in rhabdo, cytokines in septic shock, water-soluble antibiotics, and other middle molecular weight solids that diffusion struggle with. The rule of thumb is straightforward. The more fluid you ultrafilter, the more solids you clear by convection. Higher ultrafiltration rate equals higher convective clearance. So between diffusion and convection, we've now covered solids removal across the entire molecular size range. We're done, right? Nope. There's actually one more mechanism. And although it's the quietest of the four, it's actually worth knowing about. Okay, for this part, it's kind of tricky to appreciate it on this view. So we're going to have to change the position of the camera. Okay, now we're ready. So adsorption, not to be confused with absorption, is the adherence of solid and biological matter directly to the surface of the membrane. Unlike the other three mechanisms, adsorption doesn't move solids to the other side. They get stuck to the membrane itself. This contributes to the removal of certain plasma proteins, molecules that are too big to pass through the filter. Things like mediators and endotoxins. But its capacity is limited. As you can see, over time, more and more purple molecules get stuck on the filter. And once the filter is saturated, adsorption stops. And therefore, that's the downside to be aware of. Over time, all that adhered material progressively clogs the filter. The filter becomes less efficient, the MP rise, and eventually the circuit needs to be changed. This is one of the reasons CRRT filters have a finite lifespan, typically around 24 to 72 hours in clinical practice. Okay, now let's do a quick recap. CRRT works through four mechanisms operating across a semi-permeable membrane. The first one that we talk about is the diffusion, the movement of small solids down concentration gradient, your urea, potassium, bicarbonate. And then the second that we've discussed is the ultrafiltration, which is purely movement of water across a pressure gradient. And this is how we manage fluid balance. The next one is the convection, which is the solvent drags along with that water. And this is how we clear middle and large molecule. And the last one is absorption, which is how the solids bind directly to the filter itself and remove from the circulation. Different CRRT modalities, SCARF, CVVHD, CVVHF, CVVHDF, are all simply different combinations and emphasis of these same four principles. We'll unpack those modalities in the next video. Until then, thanks for watching. And remember, in CRRT, as in physiology, it's never just one mechanism doing all the work. See you later.